Right. We're going to work on the jumbled audio, but Justin said we're going to record the meeting so that people who can't be here can watch it, and it'll also be on the city's website for viewing later. So good afternoon, and thank you all for being here. This is the second meeting of the Technical Advisory Committee for Affordable Housing Fund for the City of Wichita. And this is kind of building on what we heard at the last meeting, which was about a month ago, and then tried to think about how to focus some of the funds, particularly the ARPA funds that we talked about last time, that the city has earmarked for affordable housing. Next, please. So today, what I want to accomplish is we're going to quickly recap what we heard last week. I want to provide a few updates about the funds and some other funds that have become available that really could create a broader impact in terms of affordable housing in Wichita. Then talk through a little bit about what the needs are, a little bit more detail on the numbers behind the numbers. And we have a few project examples that show how these funds could work and how far they might go. And just to help guide the conversation, we're going to stop for conversation throughout and kind of take notes as we talk. So to get started, want to review the purpose of this advisory committee. It was formed to advise the city manager about the best use of ARPA funds that have been earmarked for affordable housing. The recommendations we'll be presenting to council actually in a couple of weeks. So we still have some more work to do. And then that'll move kind of into that public review and comment period where there'll be presentations to DAB boards, other forums to talk about affordable housing and how these funds might work in the community. I will say for those of you who are here and not on the committee, this is an opportunity to observe the Technical Advisory Committee and our discussion, and we'll have some time at the end for public comment. Thank you for being here. So today's key questions: what should the focus of the ARPA funds be? We're going to talk about some other opportunities and other funds, but really focus on those ARPA funds. I forget to breathe as much when I'm wearing a mask, so if I start wavering, please let me know. Talk about kind of how those funds should be allocated. Is it home ownership? And then if it is home ownership, what do we need to make that successful? And what does that look like, being gap funding, being down payment assistance, being credit support and home buyer education, et cetera. If it's rental housing, some of the similar questions for that context. So a few key observations from last time. You might recall that we talked about how the pandemic has really elevated housing problems. That's not the right word, has created more housing challenges and brought it to more of the forefront for the community in terms of people being behind on rent, having less funds for other necessities like food, and the average back rent owed is pretty substantial for those who've been helped by emergency funds. We also talked through what it takes to rent a safe and decent 2-bedroom home and not be cost burdened, and how if you earned minimum wage, it would take more hours than we have of daylight a week. And we also talked a little bit about how historic policies such as redlining impacted how our community looks today. Years of not having access to capital really put a lot of our neighbors and neighborhoods behind, and there's potential to help address a lot of the challenges caused by redlining, but it's not an easy task, but it is an important task. And housing is definitely an equity issue in Wichita. So some of the things we heard when we talked about, if you had unlimited resources, what's the one thing you would fix related to housing? We heard a lot about improving the quality of the overall housing stock, be it rental or for sale. We heard about the need for down payment assistance to create more home ownership opportunities for households who are ready and to help build generational wealth. We talked about addressing equity and health disparities, growing capacity so that we can deliver enough housing units if we do have funds available. And then, property maintenance, more supports for renters, and some other key elements. And then we had some polling during the conversation, and there was some interesting information that came out of that. First of all, about half of you all grew up in Wichita and have a commitment to the community, and some of you didn't grow up here and have also very committed to seeing Wichita thrive. In the bottom left, the words that came to mind when we think about the affordable housing that we have in Wichita are not positive. So we have a lot of work to do, but it's good that we're here trying to spearhead that work. In terms of what affordable housing funds could do or should do, 60% of you said, this could really support rehab and renovation and really start to improve the housing stock in our core. So that emerged as a priority. And then there was a little bit of a disconnect's not quite the right word, but a challenge in terms of a preference for seeing more missing middle or 2 to 20 unit housing. So how does that fit into renovating and improving homeownership opportunities is something to consider and talk through. And so to sum it up, the 4 emerging priorities we saw from the conversation was we want to increase the amount of quality affordable housing. I don't think that's really anything to question, or there was really good support for that. We talked about building capacity for investment so that as we do things, we do them well and do them for long-term sustainability and success. And we talked a lot about support for homeowners as well as support for renters and how we need the ecosystem around housing and around households to really support stability. And so really want to pause for a bit of discussion. How would you initially invest housing funds to increase the amount of affordable housing stock? And this is just a question to kind of get back to that focus of, we have some funds, where should we spend them? New construction anywhere in the city, infill construction in targeted neighborhoods, rehabilitation in targeted neighborhoods, or what's the priority? Any thoughts there?
This is Councilmember Jeff Blueball. Do you guys mind if I jump in here a little bit?
Go ahead, Jeff.
A lot of what we're seeing throughout the city, if you look at what properties are for sale out there, there's not a lot of quality product in the lower price range. And as you've just highlighted, with the inventory that's out there, and there's a lot of infill opportunities. We've really got to change the neighborhood, whether it be through rehab or new construction, to be able to put more inventory out there. Otherwise, a new house right now you're lucky to start at $250,000, $300,000, and we've got to have a product, I think, around the $100,000 range, a little bit more. I don't know what that looks like, whether that's a renovated property of good quality, whether that's one side of a duplex or something, but I'm afraid that there's becoming such a big gap that people may be 40, 50, they may never be able to own their own home, and I think that's where a lot of the opportunities lie.
Okay, thank you.
I think Councilman Blueball makes a good point. One thing I feel like I've noticed is it just seems like there are more multi-unit properties, in the 10 to 20 unit range that are getting scooped up by, private developers and or property management companies, like a Cedar Mills or a Point Guard Management or something like that. And so, they can go in there and renovate it, but obviously that's not producing affordable rents as an outcome. So I guess, how can we make sure that some of those that are getting, renovated are either subsidized or some other way so that that cost can be kept down, and that they're not all turned into just kind of like luxury style new spaces.
Thank you. So preserving some of the naturally occurring affordable housing. Any other thoughts on the priority question? Anne.
I love the opportunity of homeownership in the urban core, as you all know. I believe that the appraisal gap that exists because of the deteriorated housing stock around the new construction in the inner core is impossible and expensive to overcome, especially as construction prices have gone up. And affordable housing in the suburbs brings in the infrastructure cost, which puts you out of the park as well. So that makes me keep coming back to rehab as a high priority in targeted areas of the community that were redlined or where people couldn't invest in their properties, so that we can start lifting the value of properties and make market rate single family housing available again in those areas. That's not to say I don't want those rehabs to be ownership opportunities either. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for that.
Thank you, Anne.
I agree with Anne. I work in code enforcement, and I assist residents with making repairs to their homes, applying for the grant programs, those types of things. And that there's such a high need for that in those communities. And there's not a lot of money to do that with. There just isn't a lot of assistance for that. And when you go in and, I work with a lot of families who don't have a working furnace, or they have a roof leak and it's destroying their property, and they have no way to make those repairs. Well, the grant programs do as well as they can. There's just not enough emphasis on that. I work with 500 to 700 families a week, and a lot of them are in this situation, and I can see that it's a really big problem.
Thank you. So home repair is part of the solution. So we'll have time for public comment at the end. So some key themes about kind of working on what we have because of the barriers and costs to new construction. Very important. Tony, it looks like you want to say something. It's not coming through. Tony, I think you're muted.
Oh, yeah, Tony, you're unmuted on Teams, but I don't know if you've got something else muted. Sometimes the speaker might be muted, but Teams isn't, and we aren't hearing you at the moment. Oh, wait a minute. It says you're muted. I wonder if I can unmute you from here. No? Nope. No, now it says you're unmuted, but we still can't hear you, Tony. I'm sorry. I don't know if it's possible for you to type in the chat, but I can certainly monitor that and we can move it back in.
Okay.
Andy, just let me know when you want me to move on.
I think we should keep moving in the interest of time. Okay, so kind of the next thing I want to talk about is some exciting dates in terms of for affordable, to make sure I'm not walking dead zone. So next slide, please. So last time we talked about the ARPA funds, which the city earmarked $5 million for affordable housing. Since that time, the city was awarded a grant through Home-ARP, which is for homeless housing through the Sally's Department Housing and Neighborhood Services. And that's another $5.5 million. So rental housing for homeless. And there's a lot of different ways that could be used as part of mixed income development or other types of housing. And then the one thing we didn't talk about last time as well is the city has a portfolio of housing authority homes, single family homes, 352, and HUD has a program called RAD, Rental Assistance Demonstration, where a lot of older public housing units are being renovated or sold in vouchers. Wichita is planning to sell these homes in phases over time as they also provide replacement housing in the future. And so this is actually one of the bigger opportunities because it's single family homes. They're spread throughout the city and the city owns them outright. So there's a lot of flexibility there in terms of, selling them and using the proceeds for the Affordable Housing Fund to support a gap that might not be filled by the ARPA funds or the Home-ARP funds. For instance, we could decide that the ARPA funds are going to be focused on home ownership, which was City Council's preference when the funds were allocated. But then as Housing and Neighborhood Services and the Housing Authority moves forward with the RAD program, we'll get some funds coming back and they can go toward affordable housing, 80% AMI and below. So a lot of flexibility there. And it could create a revolving fund and could be used to preserve existing affordable units. So there's a lot of flexibility now that we didn't have a few months ago, which I think is really exciting. And the ARPA funds, one more point there is they are short term. We have 2 years approximately to allocate or say where they're going to go. And then I think another 2 years for them to be fully dispersed and the projects launched. Yes. I'm seeing Sally nod her head and I'll believe Sally. Discussion question is thinking about the short-term goals. We're talking about preserving existing housing. We're talking about home ownership and rental stability. What do we need to consider as we meet the short-term goals of, dispersing ARPA funds wisely for the right programs, but also looking at long-term needs? An example of what I mean by that is, and it came out the last time, is you all were talking about the ecosystem. Well, we need a CDFI to help with financing. We need, to partner with Capital Federal more. We need to bolster what Habitat and Mennonite are able to do. We need more homeownership training. I hope I didn't just give all your answers, but what do you all think we need to think about Because the ARPA funds are a one-time deal, but this could be a sustaining project for the long term. So what do we need to do to make it sustaining?
Just in the short term, just concerned about evictions and foreclosures on the homeownership side that may have been deferred through moratoriums or whatnot for a large part of the pandemic, but that we, may see more of in the coming months. So as a short-term concern, focusing on kind of maybe pilot projects that could really focus on like volume of units to kind of anticipate that potential wave of recently, vacated families.
So working with households for foreclosure prevention.
Construction is a long lead time business. And so I think something that has to be considered is who is active, productive, and ready to go. Getting lands shovel ready, 1 to 2 years to allocate. And having qualified candidates means I think you really are going to have to look for the ARPA funds that have to be used quickly to those agencies and entities that are already showing the ability to do the work successfully.
Well, I think this is Byron with Mennonite Housing. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. I think if we can use funds in a way that leverages some of the existing programs that have been successful for a lot of years and use them in such a manner that, that over time, there's less funds required per project. Right now, the projects that we're working on with the city in the core area, the areas that they've designated to provide improvement, there's quite a gap. And so each house that is completed, each new family that moves in, there's quite an amount of grant funds that need to be put into that project. And if we could be working towards getting that gap minimized by being able to get appraisal values increased, kind of tags along with some of the comments already made, so that appraisal values go up and we wouldn't be restricted so much with the current maximum sales price that we're allowed. So if over time that sales price could go up and families could still have an affordable payment, I think that would help to provide the long-term opportunity to stretch the funds further.
This is Jeff Blueball. You guys kind of touched on this already, but I really like the idea of the city's got a lot of inventory out there, getting that up to quality stock to where we could get low-income buyers to go in there, buy those for those first homes, replenish the kitty with that. Just like you see a lot of developers will go in there, they'll sell development property, and then they'll buy other property. If the city could do similar thing as we're selling our assets, we're planning ahead to how else can we continue to have quality, both houses to sell, renovate, as well as improve our own rental stock as well.
Great. Thank you. And I saw that Tony added a comment into chat. I guess I can pull it up.
I've got it, Andy. Tony says, sorry, my mic's not working. I think it would I think we could modify the program the Chodos are using now, where we would have realtors, builders bring us clients who qualify for X amount loan and need some help with their gap between the build price and the amount they can borrow. We could get the land bank involved to provide lots for these types of builds.
It sounds like aligning people doing the work now with the land bank and making lots ready, and just connecting some dots that are used well now and stretching them further. Okay.
Helping market rates to meet the appraisal gap so that they could participate in some of the work, I think was one of the things I heard from Tony that's important. And then, since I have the mic, one of the things that I always worry a little bit about, and I've seen other communities use a land trust for this purpose, is that once these funds are invested in a property for the purpose of affordable housing, that the land itself be protected and that it has to remain affordable housing for a period of time, so that I buy this house, that I can't just sell it and then suddenly we gentrify areas that we were intending to create as more mixed use or affordable situations.
Did I capture that? You have good enough shorthand there. Using land trust to help sustain affordability.
Okay. Question from Scott is if some of the themes we talked about last time that we just summarized, are those still resonating as priorities? Has anything shifted in the last month as we've kind of learned more and seen more? Did I answer that correctly? Hearing none, are there other considerations about kind of building that ecosystem and setting things up for success? Hearing none, Nelson, could we please move on? Thank you. So last time we presented a big number about the scale of the need to aid those who are cost burdened for affordable housing based on their income, but aren't able to find a dedicated affordable housing unit. So they're on the open market. They're maybe paying more than 30% of their income for rent, being cost burdened. They may be doubling up or living in a crowded housing situation, or a whole number of housing challenges that cause instability, which creates a lot of the challenges we see today. I wanted to break this down a little bit so what we're talking about and can maybe think about some reasonable goals with limited funds. And so HUD defines housing problems as, and we have some data on units with facilities, plumbing facilities. It kind of gets to, but doesn't specifically say incomplete, HVAC facilities, but we know those are challenges too. We also have some data on overcrowding and a lot of cost burden. And the first example here is looking at what this shows is by income level, from the lowest at the top, 0 to 30%, to 80% range toward the bottom, of who has at least one of 4 severe is one of those problems on the prior slide. And 9% of owners have at least one severe housing problem. So about 8,000 homeowners in Wichita, and 24,000 or 24% of renters have at least one severe housing problem. So the intent of this is this could be kind of the focus of what to chip away from. A goal over the next 10 years, we want to address 25% of this or something, starting somewhere. And we also have data on just cost burden households, not just, but isolating cost burden households, 7% of homeowners, which are those who could be at risk for foreclosure because of COVID or other factors, job loss. And 20% of renter households are severely cost burdened. So again, this ties back to Wichita's affordable, but we have an affordable housing crisis. Next, which also ties to wages and economic development. In terms of overcrowding, severe overcrowding, 1.5 persons per room. That's not bedroom, it's per room. 1,300 households. And so, at a bare minimum, we need to could consider helping, 1,300 households have more suitable housing. And then the incomplete plumbing and incomplete kitchens isn't quite as severe a challenge, but for these households, it's a major challenge. So this also ties back to improving the quality. And when thinking about what a fund could offer, home repair funds could help keep a lot of homeowners in their homes, but address roofs, address some emergency things that have come up. HVAC quit, the plumbing stack needs to be replaced because it cracked. A number of those things, just bring them up for suitable living. The next level up is renovation to, modernize a home, and, hopefully that has a spillover effect to the surrounding neighborhood, and, all the way up to, gut rehab and other things.
Andy, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I think there's one thing I just want to interject here is, keep in mind, I think when we talk about that 44,000 units needing, kind of that gap, and it seems insurmountable, or maybe it's not insurmountable, but it seems really large. And I think one of the messages that we're trying to convey here is that, there are ways to just get started, right? Use the ARPA funds as the opportunity to start to chip away at that big number. And I think some of what I hear, kind of through the series of slides is sort of demonstrating the different types of needs that could point to different types of programs that could be done in the short term to just begin to chip away at that large number. And I just wanted to kind of re-emphasize that that's part of what we're doing here. And I think part of the questions that are going to come up in the discussion we want to have is, there are different types of needs, different types of families, different types of structures, and then to be able to start to zero in on that.
Thank you, Justin. So, and because the home ARP funds are on the table to help with the homelessness challenge, and there's other initiatives underway as well, and other funds that are being put in place now. We have a 5-year average of nearly 600 homeless persons on our annual counts. And there's a lot of research that tells us that it costs about a third to house with supportive services that help homeless individuals transition to not being homeless. It costs about a third of what it does to provide emergency services, the urgent services, the emergency room healthcare, shelter services, and all of that. So a lot of communities are kind of changing to how do we permanently house homeless individuals, and it's a huge challenge, but there's a lot of work being done there, and there's some funds available to try some new things here. And these are just some additional statistics about our homeless challenge. Yes. Right. So Ann asked a clarifying point about we aren't seeing children in the data, and that's partly because overcrowded or doubling up is not included in the point in time count. It's unsheltered people at that time the count is being done. And so how do we make sense of the 44,000? And I just took an approach of stacking these. So if we deal with kind of the most severe challenges first, we can start at homeless housing and severely overcrowded or incomplete infrastructure in homes through renovation, and then start to work on severely cost burden and cost burden. So it's a way of thinking about prioritizing our efforts as we work to stabilize our existing stock and provide better housing options for our neighbors. The data is broken down that way. The slide is not. So does this analysis help or change or inform your thoughts about how to focus an affordable housing fund, particularly the ARPA dollars? Are any thoughts there? Yes.
One of the things that we're hearing nationally in affordable housing is the one thing that we're really not talking about or not seeing here. The number is probably actually closer to 50,000 because we have a exponentially increasing number of baby boomers that are retiring, and we're seeing a tremendous lack in affordable housing for seniors. And they're really expecting in the next 10 years to see that hit a critical state. So if we're really looking at a 10-year period out, the number's bigger than where we are today.
Thank you. The thoughts about focusing. I should give you your own mic.
Sorry, I'm glad I missed the first meeting. I think, I'm looking at Suzanne, but I believe that the large majority of the persons we're seeing in desperate need of housing repair support are also the elderly. So looking at that problem, not only as is it better to renovate where they are to find something affordable that can accommodate them for the next phase of living is important. And so bringing that up was really good because I think it's a little more complicated in that group.
I add something to that real quick too. With that population too, they've been in those homes for a long time and they don't want to leave those homes and get into, a senior apartment or until absolutely necessary or nursing homes. And so a lot of them that I work, whether they get their home repaired or not, they're going to stay there. And that's something we need to consider is they're not always safe in those homes, but that this is my home. This is where I've lived for 50, 60 years. I'm not leaving.
Trying to make the ARPA dollars go further, I think about is there opportunities for a match, such as, whether it's new construction or whether it's a key cost driver on a house, the roof, the heating, the air, plumbing, something that, may run in excess of $5,000. I wonder if there's an opportunity to maybe match ARPA funds with maybe some tax increment financing in these pockets of the core that we want to make the housing better, but still affordable. And if we had a combination of ARPA dollars, maybe some tax increment financing where the property taxes paid go toward some of those improvements that the properties need to get them to where they are a good quality of property, I'd like to maybe look into those opportunities if we could.
So kind of stretching things as far as we can. Other tools. potential pilot project examples.
Andy, your audio cut out, I think, on our end. And so if you said something you want me to add to the whiteboard here, let me know.
I was just asking if there were any other thoughts before we move to the examples.
Got it.
All right. So, and maybe this will be really informative, I hope. Like, what do potential projects look like? How far could funds go? We're going to look at 2 clusters of housing authority homes. Do you have a? Go. Okay, hold that thought. So what we did was, an economic feasibility analysis of what it costs to develop. And this example is a new home, but we have other, rehab, renovation, et cetera, versus the value in the neighborhood it's located in and what that gap is. And in communities we've worked in, this has really helped the conversation about, earmarking certain funds for rehab versus new construction and thinking through the strategy of maximizing that impact like you all have been saying. Next slide, please. And so in March, when we gave a presentation about incentives that the city should consider to support urban infill, we did a feasibility analysis in different neighborhoods. In the places where we did kind of a neighborhood cycle analysis, looking at the most challenged to those that don't need, those where housing is provided by the market without any incentives. So, and the gap at that time kind of ranged from 75,000 in kind of our more challenged neighborhoods to 30,000 in some of ours that are kind of close to becoming market supported. And we took this a step further to inform this conversation, thinking through what does new infill development cost? What's the gap there versus gut rehabs versus renovation or kind of that home repair approach, and then versus like focusing on rental and multifamily. And so these are kind of order of magnitude numbers, and they will vary based on the project, the house, the neighborhood, especially in rehab. We know those surprises come up in older homes. But what we can start to think about is how far will $5 million go? And what's the approach? Do we focus just on new construction? Well, we'll be fortunate to get 70 units. It's probably closer to 50 with the way housing costs are and lot availability and a number of other things. If we focus on gut rehabs, we could get 100 units. If we focus on home repair, 200. Or, 1 or 2 multifamily projects we could support. We could do that and be done. And then a lot of families would have homes, but what's the right mix? And what's the right approach? Thinking of those long-term elements we've been talking about as well. I mean, are there trade-offs we need to think about? And this is back to you all. What's the right mix of funds? We know we have $5 million. Is there a ratio there that we could start to think about in terms of recommending $2 or $3 million to infill development new, $1 million to home repair, et cetera? We can start to see what our goal and target is for households and homes will help. So curious what your reflections are there.
I think it's got to be a hybrid, like you said, of that. I would think more of a focus on new construction, but could we partner that with some tax abatements? And then same thing with you've got to take care of the whole neighborhood. So I think you definitely got to have the renovation a part of that as well. And seeing, like I mentioned earlier, a TIF or some kind of tax abatement or something. I think we've got to use our tools we have locally as well to stretch these federal dollars.
Barry?
Last time we asked the question about how many people can qualify to enter into a home that they would own if they don't currently have that. And I think the answer was about 20. And so I would say don't build any more single family homes if you don't think you can find enough qualified people. I don't know where that level is, but you wouldn't want to be sitting with those when the money when we have to spend the money. I don't know where that is. I don't know how many of those people you can find that could qualify.
Unlimited number of qualified candidates if you can match the services to get them ready.
For those online, there's conversation about, with the Section 8 vouchers, the subsidy amount is oftentimes more than, a Habitat home mortgage, or with mortgage rates now, kind of affordable mortgages, but so there's a lot of people who could qualify, financially, but there's also that need to get them there and ready to be a homeowner, which takes time.
Andy, this is Justin. Tony's got another comment here. He says, I work in the benefit district east of I-35, and I can drive you around and show you several boarded up multifamily units. Not sure that would be a good investment for the funds. And I think just kind of speaking to the amount of investment needed per unit, I think it's kind of what's driving at that, it sounds like, Tony.
That's to renovate some existing boarded up, but poor quality multifamily, is that correct?
Yes.
Any other thoughts about, what we mean by trade-offs is if we do focus the ARPA funds more on the home ownership side through home repair, renovation, et cetera, like is there a trade-off there that we need to consider versus, thinking about?
Absolutely a trade-off there. If you're focusing right down that middle, you're leaving off the ends. You're leaving off, you're not going to find a whole lot of seniors that are looking to get into new mortgages. So new construction on that end. But you're also oftentimes leaving off those who've been most impacted by disparate housing policies in the past that aren't there yet. They aren't quite ready necessarily for home ownership, and to simply ignore that group in the preference to help the middle, it is just compounding the challenge. And that's why, again, a healthy mix across the board, rental and home ownership. So yes, I definitely see some trade-offs. The other is infill development. The trade-off is the numbers. Those numbers make me want to cry. We need 44,000 units, and we're looking at, if we take 200, right? We're really excited, $5 million, but then when you go back down to it and you're like, 200. How many years is it going to take at 200 and a $5 million investment to make a dent in this? And so I think we need to be creative.
Yeah, to that point, and a comment I was going to make earlier was, especially because it seems that the folks who are most cost burdened are renters. From the data that you all collected, I think it was about 20% of renters are cost burdened, but not all renters are necessarily ready to be homeowners. I mean, there are a lot of programs out there, whether it's cities or land trusts or other kinds of structures, you know, that will acquire properties, and then, you know, basically the tenant is, their rental is converting into equity over time. If not right at the beginning, at least, like, you know, once they've paid rent for 2 years or 3 years or whatever, they qualify to then convert that into a mortgage or something like that. So I guess just thinking about how renters can maybe possibly, like, focusing on the types of stock and properties that can accommodate renters in the short term and then turn into home ownership opportunities down the line. I don't know if that would be townhomes or different kinds of, like, low affordable kind of condo apartments. But yeah.
So the other thing that often comes up with this is do you take the shotgun approach or do you take the targeted neighborhood approach? And oftentimes, you know, people are trying to spread that peanut butter really thin, right? Making sure we're hitting every corner, but are we really leveraging? Is that causing those increases in neighborhoods that bring up, that build? And sometimes there, if we pick a neighborhood and go, we're going to make a concerted effort in this neighborhood and that neighborhood, and it's not necessarily spread out. I'd love to hear others' feedback.
Especially if you can find a census tract where it's like, hey, this census tract has 40% of renters who are cost burdened. By all means.
Redlining absolutely targeted areas, and it's an impact that we're trying to counteract, you know, 40 years later. So I feel like we've been able to demonstrate the positivity of a targeted approach, but the challenge is always landlords. So one of the things that I struggle with a lot is when we say 24% of renters are burdened by one of 4 major housing problems. I want to say landlords are burdened with those housing issues and renters suffer living there with no many options. So helping landlords be incentivized to improve the circumstances is something that I think is a part of the mix because they're the property owner, manager, and kind of control part of this picture in a very difficult way to address, but we got to do something about that. Have everybody leave town and pray for a tornado is one of the things on my list, but it's never socially acceptable.
On that note, maybe there's an opportunity to do some kind of agreement between the landlord and tenant that if they apply for example one of those major features of the house being entertained, maybe it's done with ARPA or tax incentive financing or something, and then we could agree that the landlord won't raise the rent over 3 years or something like that.
Somehow working with landlords and hopefully good landlords to keep things affordable and stable and at a quality level that helps people not be concerned about their home and can focus on other things. That's a major topic in a lot of places we're working, and there's some different initiatives to get more landlords to, for instance, like accept Section 8 vouchers, like a kind of landlord insurance program, and just some like Tulsa has a Gold Star landlord, which is kind of like they agree to a quality level and also have kind of a scoring preference for different programs and incentives too, as well. I think if there's nothing else on this, really great conversation. We'd like to go through some of the pilot projects, and what you see on this map is that has been the focus of Places for People, and then kind of the city thought and efforts and policy discussions around how to kind of help the challenges in this area. And the blue dots, at least they're blue on this end, are existing housing authority homes. And you can see they're scattered around the city, but there is a concentration in Northeast Wichita and a little bit in Southwest Wichita, and kind of the blue lake-looking areas. That's 100-year floodplain, because there are challenges and some of the neighborhoods with flooding, and some of those homes will not be rebuilt because we don't want to rebuild in the flood zone and have people deal with that hazard. So we took a couple of examples. This is North Minnesota Piat. I think I said that wrong. Piat. I'm from here and I said it wrong. Sorry, everybody. And Ash Street, north of 25th Street. There are 42 properties here, 42 single family homes. They were built in the 50s, but renovated at some point. They're a little bit smaller footprint, about 1,000 to 1,500 square feet, mostly 3, 4, and 5 bedrooms. A challenge of some of the housing authority homes that have a lot of bedrooms is that some of the bedrooms are the size of a closet. So you'll see on capital needs, we might remove some walls and open them up and make them more livable for families. And Sally has mentioned the 5 and 6 bedrooms are difficult to rent. So maybe we don't need as many of those, but we could have more 3 or 4 bedrooms. And so we have the current assessed values on here as part of an input, which does not necessarily reflect market value because they are publicly owned sites. And then what do they need? They need cosmetic improvements, new flooring, maybe new cabinetry, countertops. Some need some HVAC and windows, some concrete and landscaping. Most of these in the city's portfolio do not have carports or garages. And there could be an option in some of these scenarios for a developer to add a carport or something because we get hail and snow. It is a amenity that a lot of people want in our market. But that could be an option that if a household can afford it, we could add it, we or they. So some other considerations is there are single family homes nearby. These are grouped together, which does help with kind of development efficiency. So you can stage it and go from house to house instead of stage, then move the next block over and stage. And then one note, this is not a formally redlined area. It's just north of the boundaries because it was built in the 50s and the redlining map came out in the 30s. But a lot of the same challenges that came from redlining impacted this area. And so I believe, okay, these are kind of small. So what we did was a couple of gap analyses. And one was acquiring these and selling them as for sale homes. And the other one was acquiring them and renovating them as affordable rentals. So the rent I set in my model is $700 a month for a 3-bedroom home, which is actually below market in this area, and they would be higher quality. So there's a couple things to consider on the does it still work over here? I have an acquisition cost of about 65 grand $40,000 renovation cost, and then the soft cost, overhead, profit, carrying costs, financing fees, marketing that a developer is going to have to address and deal with. Then on the right side, a home buyer would buy this at a market value, which I'm saying is $90,000 a unit. It could be $100,000. I mean, that's going to vary a little bit. And then, later on in the process, it could be higher because the neighborhood's stabilizing and we're getting appraisals that come in at the right value, et cetera. But to make this work, we need a loan of $72,000, 80% loan. We need a down payment of $18,000 for the homeowner. And then that leaves the $30,000 gap. Renovate and sell all of these on average for a gap of $1.3 million. So 30%, 20 to 30% of the fund could do 42 single family homes, really stabilize this area. And so that's one approach. There's some other caveats there that could help the funds go further. Because a lot of homeowners, we know from data, 85% of households don't have enough saved for a 3.5% down payment. Programs for first-time home buyers and whatnot, but there's also PMI and other things that add to the cost. So there is down payment assistance through Home 80. Would need down payment assistance. So that's one area the fund could go to. Or the fund could, help with the construction gap or both. The other option is these are city-owned properties through the Housing Authority. There are instances where, trying to think of a simple way to phrase this, the city would carry the second mortgage, that would be the down payment. And the rest, the bank loan, the city would get the bank loan money back. So it could still go into supporting more affordable housing. So that would take out the need for more down payment assistance and so forth. The city could also do a demonstration project because they do have capital improvement funds that they can use to renovate and sell for affordable home ownership. That would probably cover 30-ish homes. So there could be kind of a, we're talking about this cluster here, but there's kind of a cluster over here as well. So you could really impact 75 homes with about $1.5 million. If we thought of this more as a rental project, we do the same level of renovation. We agree to rent them at affordable rents. The Housing Authority has the leverage to put a land use restriction on them when they sell them, that they'll still be for affordable housing, so we're preserving quality affordable housing. The gap's much higher. Instead of $30,000 a unit, sorry, it's over here. It's $60,000 a unit. So just to make these affordable rental, our dollars will not go as far. We could also do a mix. And the costs are slightly higher on affordable rental because of developer fee expectations and some additional carrying costs. And so key takeaways for discussion is, the rent, technically the rent and for sale prices, the mortgage would be about $350 or $400 on the home a month. So with utilities and stuff, $600 a month, which is affordable. This is affordable at or below 50% AMI. You could, there's some flexibility if households can afford it to add that carport. The rental scenario would really require something else as well. There may be some options to layer it with tax credits if you're able to get an allocation, perhaps 4% credits. But this could be development gap funds, down payment assistance, closing cost assistance, and home ownership training, or just direct funds to allow a developer to charge affordable rents. Ann?
In our community, people are so afraid of living next to a renter if they're a homeowner. And so I'd be curious if this were considered a development project, if we purposely mixed renters and homeowners, where there was property management education for all of those people. So if you're going to be a tenant, you get trained about how to take care of the property you live in, and that impacts, maybe your rent increase, or maybe there's an incentive if you turn off your water when you leave for vacation or whatever. But that part of the demonstration would be to show renters and homeowners living amicably together. Anyway, just a thought.
I'd be curious if there was a way that we could get around a new buyer having to pay the private mortgage insurance. You may have said this earlier, but if there's a way maybe the city could retain a 20% ownership, or retain something to where we could go back and do a second of some sort, just any way that gives that buyer a little more buying power, and try to some way skirt paying that private mortgage insurance.
Yes, there are ways, and it's kind of a national conversation now through the mortgage industry, recognizing we have a housing shortage, and particularly affordable housing shortage. Of what are some mechanisms to help with that? I was looking at Takeda because I'm not sure what you've seen on that with Capital Federal and what you do.
Take care of that. The lender would pretty much have to take care of the PMI, of course, because we have our PMI companies, and so we pass that fee on to them. But if we did the 100% loans, of course, then that means that the buyer would not pay it, but we would take care of it. So that would be something that would be a lender discussion. I'd have to go back to Capital Federal and say, do we want to start paying their PMI?
Right. But that, right. And there could be a conversation through philanthropy or the philanthropic wings of different banks to contribute to that. Yeah. The city has the option to carry back 20% as a lien. That would be paid back if it's sold. And it would also help replenish the fund, is what Sally said. Letting and Justin finish that note, the thought.
Oh, I'm good. I've got it written down. I was just dictating while we were doing this. I'll jump back up to this.
Yep. Next example.
Samples here.
And there's a lot of different areas and clusters we could look at. You could also map what are vacant properties or potential land bank properties. We aren't quite, there where they're in the land bank yet. That could go as part of this, where we renovate a portfolio and start doing infill over time to further stabilize the neighborhood and whatnot. But this is in Southwest Wichita at Pawnee and Meridian. There are 20 homes here, and they're a bit larger. They still don't have garages, but we have 1,500 to 2,000 square feet currently bedroom. And again, some of the bedrooms are tiny. So these could be converted down to create a more marketable layout. Current assessed value is about $100 to 105,000, which is pretty close to market down here based on some sales. Really kind of the same capital needs. The city did replace a lot of roofs in 2008, so roofs aren't too bad, but there's a bunch of other things. And so their marketable square footages, they are grouped together. These also are not in a formerly redlined area. And I know we need to look at those redlined areas and the assets there as well. And so you'll see different numbers here. The scale of the gap is very similar. And I forgot to change that to 65,000. But you know, the cost to redevelop these would be about 155,000. The acquisition cost is a little higher at 95,000. And so the market value is about, as renovated, about $130,000 per unit. Home sales that we found in the area are about, you know, 85 to 150,000. So these would be pretty nice quality homes when the renovations are complete. And so these would have a $25,000 gap, but the down payment required would be a bit higher than the previous example. On the affordable rental side, you know, I put rents in this neighborhood at 850. So it's closer to 60 to 80% AMI. If we held it at that level, if you wanted them to be more affordable, the gap would just be larger, which illustrates the need on the rental strategy to layer some other tools like tax credits to really stretch the dollars further. You need $500,000 of gap funding to turn these, renovate and turn over to home ownership, plus whatever other home buyer supports would be needed. So really, a key takeaway is the model looks kind of similar. The homes are very similar. The options are very similar. The affordability level is a little different. But it's another opportunity in an area of the city to preserve and provide some new home ownership and quality affordable housing opportunities.
Andy, I think the other thing that, at least between these two, begins to demonstrate, I think, the, you know, kind of where you can, you know, I think of it as sort of you can push one variable up and another one goes down, but how do you move them around? And I think, you know, this is a good example of, you know, it's, you're also looking at, you know, the for sale and the rental. You're looking at, you know, the gap and how far it'll go. You're also looking at, you know, you've shifted a little bit on, you know, what's affordable and what's the range? Is this the 60 to 80? Is it 60 or you know, 50% AMI? And then I think also what I see here is, you know, the market of the neighborhoods are also going to make a difference, right? And so I think that begins to talk about some of these trade-offs, or at least the flexibility of what we can be recommending, ultimately recommending between owner, renter, the type of neighborhood, the type of affordability, and be able to kind of zero in on kind of a good mix as we move forward.
Right. The next example is using another city-owned site to do, it would be a new construction, the mixed income, mixed use project. This has about 1.3 acres. You could do 40 to 60 units here with ground level commercial. I kind of assumed a 50 unit property with 3 stories and some ground level commercial. So it's adjacent to the new transit facility. It's an area where you could think about reduced parking requirements and should. It could be workforce housing focused, so maybe the 80% AMI range. And I also included 5 units for formerly homeless with services, thinking about the home ARP funds being in here as well. And so I looked at both a market rate and a mixed income scenario to kind of think through what it would take to just do a project, and then what it would take to do, curate a mixed income property that also provides those homeless units that we have some funding for. And so the gap's not small. On the left here, we have a market rate development, about $8.3 million to construct. We estimate the value would be about $6.3 million. So the gap is $2 million. And this is why a lot of the new multifamily projects we've seen recently ask for TIF so that they can complete their project. And then the second scenario, basically it costs a little bit more because of some of the, application and development cost, soft cost for developing mixed income. The rents, the revenue would be lower, so the value is lower. So there's a much more substantial gap, and it's actually $4 million. It is. The value, market value would be $4 million, and the gap would be $4.6 million. And this is a project that wouldn't even be looked at without tax credits to help get that mix and cover the gap. But it is an example of something that affordable housing funds do participate in to cover kind of the last gap. Like, okay, you get tax credits, tax credit award. Well, we'll come in with $10,000 a unit or something. That's another example of how an affordable housing project could work on a site the city owns. I do have an acquisition cost in here, which could be part of the conversation. It could be waived, it could be reduced, it could be a land lease, a number of other things. So that is the third example, but this is one where you would not want all of wouldn't want to just support one project with ARPA, is what I've heard from just about everybody. These scenarios impact your thinking of how to focus ARPA funds? Are we kind of coming to I know there are a lot of considerations and two conversations. It's tough to say we should do this and that. But I'm curious if these help inform your thinking or the reactions.
I like the first two scenarios. It seems like we're putting quality houses back out there on the tax rolls and improving the neighborhood. The third scenario, I'm a little bit more skeptical of, just because that's the new up and coming area of the city, and is that the best use for the property?
Workforce housing in areas where you're providing the hospitality type services that draw people is really critical. And that's one of the challenges. I know Kansas City is a great example. Johnson County can't even get an RN to their hospitals because there's no place for them to live close enough that they can afford anymore. And who's going to drive, 30 miles for a $25 an hour job? And that seems like a decent job, but it's not enough. So I think in Wichita, we're going to face that workforce housing issue. The people who will take those jobs, where are they going to live that they can afford, and make sure that those hospitality industries can keep employees so they can staff and serve the people who come in to be entertained there. So that's why I kind of really love that downtown, get some really affordable housing downtown to counteract all the higher end stuff that's there.
Other thoughts or concerns?
Good evening. Through all of this, great job, great presentation. No, we're not finished. We just spoke about a tax base and dealing with the new construction aspect. Is anybody here from the county? That's somebody that needs to be at the table, because I'm developing a property right now 4 duplexes, triplex. I previously paid $500 a year for my taxes. Now they're going to turn around to be about $15,000 a year for the same property, 1.3 acres. You know, to have an incentive to offer somebody a reasonable amount of money for rent. The county also has to chip in something to help us as a tool to do a due diligence to save, to help us, you know, control the rent, you know, per the unit. Because as soon as they there, before I even put a tenant in there, measuring and assessing what they're gonna charge me as soon as I finish the project. So we can do some tax incentives to help spur on some affordable housing development, because as a developer, we're faced with a lot of obstacles, you know, and I'm sure we well of it post-COVID with the increased cost of lumber at 900% increase. And I feel as though with that tax base and moving these properties to a different tax base, there's been no incentive for from the county to say, you know, we can do some abatements, we can, you know, various things. Because I heard one guy say about being able to offer a rental tenant without a price increase for 3 years. I can't say I see that from the county. You know, as soon as, you know, you make an improvement, you know, not just yours, but everybody in the whole community's rate is going to go up.
Thank you.
Andy, there's another comment in the chat that at one time we had I'm reading that it's $60 million grant to renovate these properties. Is that not available anymore?
The city never received a $60 million grant. The city had received authorization from HUD to try and secure up to $60 million in private funding in order to renovate all of the public housing properties. We have secured almost $36 million for the senior properties. So the 2 high rises, McLean Manor, Greenway Manor, and the 2 garden apartments, Rosa Gregg and Bernice Hutcherson. And we're actually closing financing next week. We were unable to secure financing for the single family homes. Even HUD and an FHA loan refused to provide a loan for these properties because of their scattered nature, and that stating that they were too expensive and difficult to manage and maintain. Same held true, we did acquire 4% low-income housing tax credits, but could not find a tax credit investor willing to buy the credits for the same exact reasons. The properties were much too expensive and difficult to manage and maintain. And is exactly why we're looking for another alternative.
Thank you, Sally. Andy, I just wanted to mention it's 6 o'clock. I don't know what our timing is.
What was our timing? Okay. I do want to respect your time. You know, one of the things we're thinking about, okay. You know, we're working toward recommending something to, you know, city manager and council about how to focus these funds. I'm definitely open to, and we've had a lot of great conversation, and we want to take that and reflect back to you by early next week. It's like, what if we allocate 40% to X, Y, and Z to try to get, and if we want to do, I don't know, 100 home repair projects to help people stay in their homes. We want to do 3 pilot projects with housing authority properties where we cover the gap, development gap, and the city does a forgot the term, hold back. Or like, we need to try to get a little bit specific, and I'm just curious if we can get there, or what would help you get there. Because none of the work toward affordable units is bad. It's not great if we don't do it well, where it's becomes sustainable. But we do need to start somewhere. I'm curious if you have some thoughts or need to digest with a little bit more time, and if there's something that would help in the short term as we follow up with some questions via email.
Do we have some specifics as to what the home repair might look like? What a program, did we have any examples of that?
Could you say that again one more time? Or Andy,
I heard
did you get that?
specifics about what a home repair program would look like.
Yes, correct.
Well, I'll start with a statement. A lot of communities do have home repair programs through some of the entitlement funds from HUD. That usually it's a $5,000 cap, and sometimes there's a match requirement where it's not a grant. The conversation in a lot of places is increasing the cap to $25,000 to address the systems and repairing it correctly. So a lot of times this moves. It is a lot of times it is a grant to a homeowner with some clawback. So like if you sell the next year, you have to pay back 90% of the grant, or a lien, or maybe it's a 5-year window that's a little bit more flexible. So that's kind of a general outlay of what I think about with home repair programs. And a lot of places also have like, they identify 5 qualified contractors that they know will do the work right. Any other thoughts from the committee? And I will be following up on just questions that come to mind that would just help kind of say, I agree with this focus. I think we'll put together 3 or 4 options and do some polling just to try to get up some parameters to work with.
Curious on the scenarios that were offered, that the multifamily property was a new construction project. Just curious how, if that would look differently on a rehab, if that makes a significant difference or not. And then also, I guess, just like talking about the $5 million figure. Yeah, I think, definitely no more than, 2 or 3 million of that toward just gap financing. I mean, you definitely want to keep some of that for some of the other programs that we've talked about. So even if you put 3 million toward it, that's about how much, that's 2.5 for the first 2 scenarios, the Haskell and the Pyatt. The Pyatt was what, 1.3. If you sold those properties, 2.4, 2.5 if you rented those properties. So yeah, the one downtown love it, but probably not with these ARPA funds. It's probably make more sense like as a public-private kind of development.
To address your first comment on renovation, if it was a renovation project, would it be more efficient? Probably no. Normally, especially if it's affordable housing, it's probably going to be 30 to 50% more per unit. And that's just what we've seen on tax credit projects and renovation projects because of the retrofitting. Now, there are properties, if you can find them, that need a lighter touch. Those tend to be in the minority in kind of these the public-private partnership and affordable housing deals.
Investment in making some tax incentives. Aren't the tips really where the county works with the city on some combination?
I think TIF is the main one where the county's on board. There's not a separate tax abatement that some other communities have. That's yeah. Right, and IRBs are used sometimes to help with the sales taxes for construction materials on multifamily. I'm looking at Scott to make sure I said that right. Are there any other thoughts or comments from the committee? I know we threw a lot at you, asked a lot of questions. It's getting close to dinner time. But again, we will think the other thing for us is just to mention the next steps. I do want to follow up with you all very soon about what are some options and to try to get to those more specifics. And then we're going to be working on what those recommendations to council will look like and convene on November 1st to talk through them with you all so that we can refine them if they aren't in line with what you think will work before we present to council. And again, this is really the beginning of the process. There is a timeline that is challenging for the ARPA funds, but there will be more discussion and public comment on the direction of this. Following that, we will also provide a bit more case study information on some key aspects of administration, like when it comes to, let's say, gap financing, what are some parameters we want to recommend? A lot of affordable funds have a per unit cap or percent of development cost cap on funds they will make available. And there's a whole slew of other things that we'll provide and talk through a bit. Yeah. Scott or city manager, what's the best?
I would suggest that there's not a definite timeline. However, there is a timing. Timing is imperative because of the nature of the funding. So really, it will depend on the process and kind of what we see in terms of how well it fits the needs of the community, right? And about that, it gives me an opportunity to provide just a quick clarification that this group is a technical advisory group, and we so appreciate you doing this. And it's wonderful that you're willing to lend your time and your talents to make our community even better and address a very important subject like this. The recommendation that you all will provide will go to the city manager And then the information will be shared with the city council, but I just want to emphasize again that your recommendation is going to the city manager, and there will be a status update to the city council. So just want to make sure everyone's on the same page in terms of process.
And hopefully the conversation will continue with some sort of group around affordable housing after this process is done. I think it will. Okay, if there are no other comments from the advisory committee, I can open it.
Andy, just one thing before you do that, I just want to mention Tony's comment here. Remodelers would be more comfortable dealing with payment from our funds rather than dealing directly with owners or landlords. I think this would be, I think they would be in favor of this, and I would not have a problem with 40% of the funds going towards home repair. And so I'm going to capture that on our notes here, Tony, and make sure it's part of that. I appreciate your comment. Thank you.
I'm not sure. Modelers would, you were really broken up, Justin.
I'm sorry. I wondered. Yeah. Can you hear me now?
It's kind of like Freddy Krueger.
All right.
Season. I'll read it. I have it up. Remodelers would be more comfortable dealing with payment from our funds rather than dealing with the owners or landlords. I think they would be in favor of this, and I would not have a problem with 40% of the funds going to home repair. Any other comments or thoughts from the, it is almost Halloween, from the committee? All right, well, now we have a few minutes left for any public comment.
Hi, everybody. My name is Gentry Thiessen. I am with the Realtors Association here in Wichita. I am definitely not willing to offer any statement or stance at this point, but I do have a couple questions. So this recommendation is going to the city manager, like Scott clarified, and then to city council. What's the date that it's going to city council? Okay. Okay. And will these slides be made available from this presentation online? Do we have a date on when those will be? Okay. And then when will I know that you're planning or trying to get these recommendations out to the advisory committee soon. When will those recommendations be made public? Sorry for the hard questions. Okay, thank you.
Right. I can go backwards. The recommendation should be public around November 1st after we talk with you. Before or after that, we'll get them on shortly. As far as like formal recommendations to council, we aren't sure yet. The goal is the end of the year, and we will have the slides online within the next couple of business days. Is what we're shooting for by next week, right?
Sure, for public comments. So in terms of the process then, so you all provide your recommendation to the city manager, and then from that point then, the information about your recommendation plus any additional information gets shared with the city council. That opens up an opportunity for members of the public then to comment at that point, but also I anticipate that we would likely have a public engagement process. So through the usual channels to go out in the community and solicit feedback on it as well, because we really want to make sure that this meets the needs of the community.
Any other public comments?
Hi, my name is Lonnie Barnes. You guys got a big task in here, but I think you're gonna have to ask some questions and answer some questions that you're not really sometimes addressing in here. These areas that you're showing, some of those that are heavily blue in here, and you talked about some of the areas like the northeast area, and you say put a lot of these in here. When you look at the demographics of one of those areas in here, probably 75% of the houses in those areas now are renters. And there are renters in here. So you got to ask the other question, well, why we got so many renters in here as opposed to homeowners in here? And so some of the data that it supports around here is sometimes the education, the economical base in which they live. You know, and you're gonna have to lift everything up to make these areas better and incentives. When you talk about 75% of them being landlord renters, that means landlords in here. And and most of those that live in here, in those areas, they're subsidized by Section 8 in here. And so if the subsidy wasn't there, how would the person be able to sustain or maintain that house without the rent, just on his education, economical base in which he operates in here? So you got to look at how do I incentivize some of these areas and make it important. So when I talk about that, those setting that zip code in those areas that sit right next to your universities and stuff of nature in here, maybe there needs to be some incentives coming from the university in which we offer those people incentives to live in this area, even more so, to come to the university to improve theirs, whether through the technical training or whether through the educational. You got to raise that whole boat in here. Guys, you went through there and you've torn down a lot of houses. You got a lot of empty lots in here. But you ask why people aren't buying or building in here. You got to incentivize even some of those to do it. I'll give you an example here. Chicago, you know, Chicago here, they teamed up with the team that did solar in here. And you know, Chicago, they're pressed on land, open land spaces in here, but they found lots in here, open lots, where they put solar panels that powered neighborhoods. They power, so it got to a point where you're able to almost have zero or sell back to the electric company. So you want to incentivize people to want to live in the area where I'm reducing my utilities. You want companies to come where they got reduced utilities. So you got to bring some things that are going to do similar to what you're doing with Opportunity Zone to bring investors to those targeted areas. So you got to start thinking a little bit more out of the box and asking some of the questions. What can we do to make people want to come back in here? People want to, even the people who live there, when you talk about food deserts, you can give them the best house and the best looking house in the Sahara Desert, but does he want to live there? You know, so you want to make it so that it's appealing for those who want to be there, for those who want to try and get in there. It wants to be like a country club. And you've got to start putting those incentives there to bring people back to it. And raise the educational. If you raise the education, you're going to raise the economic base. You make it all the creature features that we drive out of our neighborhoods to get bread and everything else, incentivize those companies, and people will come to those areas to want to live. There's a lot of things we can do, and we can do in the immediate time frame in here now. But landlords, and that gets to be 75% of your army, your work base out there, you better get out there and get them the tools and support they need as well. I'm a landlord. I'm gonna tell you, unless it's owner occupied, blah, 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 then you can't get nothing but a loan. And we're not trying to give any money back, selling money back. So there has to be some things that help us as well. That's 75% of your base. Just some things to think about in how you ask and answer your question.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Okay, and I think we're done. Thank you so much for your time and input. And again, you will hear from us soon.